All right, let's jump right into a deep dive today. We're tackling First Chronicles chapter 7.
Yeah, and this one, well, if you're just flipping through your Bible, it can look pretty daunting.
Totally. It's just this dense block of names, lineages, numbers,
Hmm.
tribal records.
Exactly.
Oh.
It seems like the kind of chapter people might, well, skim over pretty quickly, thinking it's just for, I don't know, hardcore genealogists.
Right, just lists. But that's what we want to unpack here. Our mission really is to navigate all this detail and see what we can actually pull out.
Because there's significant stuff hidden in there.
Hmm.
We want to understand what these old lists might tell us about the people, the times, what they cared about.
Yeah, what was important enough to record like this? Because it's not just random names. There are surprising details, little stories almost, buried in the genealogies.
It's like looking through layers. You find clues about identity, about strength, territory.
And you have to spot those moments where the writer, the chronicler, pauses and gives us a little something more than just a name.
Hmm. And what's really interesting is how it's not uniform. I mean, the chapter doesn't treat every tribe the same way.
That's a key point. The focus changes. What's emphasized for one group might be totally different for another. That selective focus itself is a clue.
Definitely. So let's start where the chapter starts with the tribe of Issachar.
Okay, Issachar. First off, it gives us the main lines. Tola, Pua, Jashub, and Shimron. Pretty straightforward, just 4 main branches listed.
But then, boom, it immediately zooms in on Tola's descendants. And here's where we hit the first big set of numbers.
Right. During King David's time, it says Tola's line alone had 22,600 fighting men.
I mean, think about that. 22,600 warriors just from one part of one tribe. That tells you right away what's on the recorder's mind here. Military strength.
Absolutely. And the list keeps going, down through Uzi to Izrahiah and his sons Michael, Obadiah, Joel, Ishiah. Wait, it says 5 chiefs along with Izrahiah, though only 4 sons are named right there.
Yeah, a little textual quirk maybe, but they're explicitly called chiefs or heads of their family divisions, leaders.
And here's where we get one of those really specific, almost revealing details.
You mean the part about the 36,000 men?
Yes, their group numbered a massive 36,000 fighting men, but it's the reason given that stands out.
Yeah. The text says specifically it was for they had many wives and children.
Exactly. Why put that detail, many wives and children, in a list focused on military numbers? What's
Oh.
that telling us?
Well, it's incredibly insightful, isn't it? It suggests that family size wasn't just, a personal thing. It was directly linked to the tribe's power.
So more wives and kids meant more potential soldiers down the line?
Pretty much. It translated into bigger kinship groups, more manpower for fighting, and that meant more social and political clout for those families and for Issachar overall.
Wow.
It implies that having large families was, well, a strategic asset, a sign of blessing maybe, but also a foundation for community strength and defense. It kind of humanizes the numbers, giving a social backdrop.
So the most personal family details are tied directly to large-scale military capacity. That's fascinating.
It really highlights a key aspect of their society. And then, when the chronicler sums up Issachar, the total fighting men across all the listed clans hits, what was it?
An impressive 87,000.
87,000. So, yeah, this heavy emphasis on military numbers right at the start really signals that this record is concerned with documenting Israel's potential power, especially its fighting force.
That focus on manpower definitely sets a tone. Okay, so Issachar is defined by these huge numbers. What about Benjamin, who comes next? Is it a similar approach?
It is, but with slight differences that are also kind of informative.
How so?
Well, it lists the main sons, Bela, Baker, and Jediel. 3 key lines. And we do get fighting men counts for their descendants again.
Okay.
But it's broken down a bit differently. For Bela's line, it lists 22,034 fighting men.
Right, I see that. And Baker's line had 20,200.
And Jediel's branch, 17,200 men ready for war. Still very significant numbers, showing Benjamin was a major military force, too. Again, the emphasis is clearly on battle readiness. But notice, it also mentions other Benjaminite descendants, like the Shuppites, Huppites, Hushites.
Ah.
But for them, there are no numbers given. Not in this section, anyway.
So the record is being selective again. Why list them but not give their counts? Any ideas?
Could be a few things. Maybe the specific source the chronicler was using didn't have those numbers. Or maybe the focus here was just on the main military divisions.
So these other groups were part of the lineage, but perhaps not highlighted for their military size in this particular record.
Possibly. It suggests, a purposeful selection of data. likely tied to the chronicler's goal of documenting Israel's identity and strength, especially thinking about the community after the exile. Military potential would be key for defense for reestablishment.
That makes sense. It's not just listing everyone, it's structured with certain priorities in mind. Okay, after Benjamin, the chapter kind of shifts gears a bit.
It does. We get a really brief mention of Naphtali's sons.
Super brief. Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, Shillem, descendants of Bilhah.
And that's basically it. No numbers, no stories, just the names.
Wow, talk about contrast. After all those military details for Issachar and Benjamin, Naphtali gets just 4 names and a maternal link.
Stark, isn't it?
What does that tell us? About Naphtali, or maybe about the record itself?
Well, it reinforces that idea we mentioned. This isn't a uniform census. For whatever reason, maybe the source material is thin, maybe Naphtali's military contribution wasn't the focus here, maybe their role was seen differently at the time this was compiled.
So they're just presented as lineage, without the emphasis on fighting strength or even land that we see elsewhere.
Exactly. And that variability is actually key to understanding how the chronicler worked and what mattered in this specific context. The lists aren't just lists, they're curated snapshots.
Right, curated presentations. Okay, let's move into the sections where things get a bit more detailed again, where we start seeing those glimpses of, like, story and place. Manasseh is one of those.
Yes, Manasseh.
Yeah.
And right away, the record introduces something different. It mentions an Aramean concubine.
Ugh, that detail, tucked right into the genealogy.
It is significant, though. It points to interethnic connections within the tribe itself. A little reminder that these ancient tribes weren't, completely homogeneous bubbles.
And the lineage goes through her to Machir, who's called the father of Gilead.
Which immediately ties the lineage to a specific place, Gilead, east of the Jordan River. Geography matters here.
Definitely. And it notes Machir married a woman who was a Huppite or Shuppite.
Connecting back to those Benjaminite groups we mentioned earlier, another intertribal link. His sister's name was Makah. It adds a layer of social reality to the list.
Then we get more names tracing the Manassite clans in Gilead Peresh, Sheresh, Ulam, Rakkam, Bedan, sons of Gilead.
Standard enough. But then, embedded in that list, we find that really unique note about Zelophehad.
Yes, Zelophehad had only daughters. That jumps out.
It seems like such a small detail, but it's actually huge if you remember the story from the Book of Numbers.
Oh, absolutely. The daughters who petitioned Moses.
Exactly. By putting in that simple fact, he had only daughters. The chronicler is directly referencing a major legal case from Numbers 27 and 36.
Where the daughters argued their father's name and inheritance shouldn't be lost just because there were no sons, and they won the right to inherit his land.
A landmark decision about women's inheritance rights in ancient Israel. So this little note in the genealogy connects to a massive legal and social precedent. It shows these lists aren't static. They interact with history and law.
That's a powerful example, and the text keeps going with female figures, right? It mentions Hamaleketh, who was Machir's sister.
And then lists her sons, Ishad, Abiezer, Mala, including a lineage traced through a sister, listing her sons. It suggests the chronicler sometimes looked beyond just the standard male line.
Interesting. And like with Gilead, the Manasseh section really brings in the geography. It lists settlements for Joseph's descendants, Manasseh and Ephraim. Towns like Bethshan, Tanakh, Megiddo, Dor.
And their surrounding villages, it's linking the people to the places. It's about land claims, tribal territory where they actually lived. For an audience maybe trying to reestablish themselves after exile, knowing those ancestral land claims would be vital.
Okay, now, the Ephraimite lineage. This part feels, well, maybe the most compelling in the chapter because there's an actual story embedded in the names.
Yeah, it really stands out. It starts, typically enough, tracing the line, Sholah, Bir, Tahath, Eliah, and so on.
A line that eventually leads down towards Nun, the father of Joshua.
Which is significant in itself, right? Connecting the tribe directly to Joshua, one of Israel's most important leaders.
But before we get to Joshua, the list just stops and tells this tragic story.
It mentions Ezer and Erlid, descendants of Ephraim, and says they were killed by the native men of Gath.
The context seems to be something about livestock, like a raid gone wrong.
That's the implication. And suddenly it's not just names anymore. It's this moment of, well, violence and loss. The text even says Ephraim, their father or ancestor, mourned them for many days. It's recording grief.
And this event is directly tied to what happens next, a birth and a naming.
Right. Ephraim has another son and names him Beriah. And the text tells us exactly why. Because there had been misfortune in his family.
His name literally means something like in misfortune or calamity. It's a living memorial to that loss.
It's such a powerful little narrative. It just breaks through the list format and reminds you these are records about real people, real families, real pain. Including this specific event and how it influenced a name shows how personal history was woven into the tribal story.
And then, right after the story of loss, the text pivots again. It highlights an achievement.
By Ephraim's daughter, Shira.
And what does she do? It says she built towns, Lower Beth Horon, Upper Beth Horon, and Uzzen Shira.
Another really striking detail about a woman, building towns. That's usually something kings or major leaders do. It requires resources, authority.
So for Shira to be credited with building these specific towns, and Beth Horon is strategically important, it suggests she must have been a person of considerable influence or capability.
It's a remarkable note about a woman's contribution to, like, the physical infrastructure and security of the tribe's territory.
So just within Ephraim's lineage here, we get a connection to top national leadership with Joshua, this deeply personal story of grief and naming, and a record of major building projects led by a woman. That is definitely not just a dry list.
Not at all.
Hmm.
It really shows the different kinds of things these genealogies could capture. They weren't just one thing. They hold lineage, national ties, personal stories, significant achievements.
And then the section grounds geographically too, listing their lands. Bethel, Nuran, Gezer, the area around Shechem.
Again, always emphasizing that connection. People, history, land, where they belonged.
Okay, finally, the chapter wraps up with the tribe of Asher.
Asher starts similarly listing the main sons, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, and importantly, it also mentions their sister, Sarah.
Then it traces the lines, especially through Beriah and Heber, and gives this really long list of names.
It is quite extensive, yeah. Malkiel, Japhlet, Shomer, Hotham, Shua, lots and lots of names.
But what's really noticeable about the Asher section, maybe even more than the long list, is the description used.
Ah, yes. The text doesn't just list names. It calls them heads of families, choice men, brave warriors, and outstanding leaders.
That's different. For Issachar and Benjamin, the focus was pure numbers, how many fighting men. For Asher, the chronicler adds this qualitative judgment.
It absolutely is qualitative. It elevates them beyond just numbers. It suggests they were known not just for potential strength, but for their character, their skill, their leadership.
Why do you think that description is included for Asher specifically?
Hard to say for sure. It might reflect Asher's particular reputation or role among the tribes, or maybe the chronicler just had a source that described them that way. But it definitely adds this layer of, well, respect or admiration to their entry.
And it does conclude with a number for Asher, too, 26,000 men ready for battle.
A solid number, for sure, but framed by that description of their quality as leaders.
So looking back over the whole chapter, it really is a mosaic, isn't it?
Definitely. You've got tribes highlighted for sheer military numbers, like Issachar and Benjamin.
Tribes mentioned almost in passing, just names like Naphtali.
And then tribes like Manasseh, Ephraim, and Asher, where you get this mix of lineage, geography, and these embedded stories or specific details about achievements or character.
It seems pretty clear that military strength, that ability to field fighting men, was a major concern for whoever compiled this, likely reflecting the needs of the community after the exile, needing to feel secure.
That seems right. And tied up with that is just the huge importance of lineage, of identity, knowing who you were, where you fit in, your connection to the land that was absolutely central. These long lists are proof of how much they value that continuity.
But yeah, the moments that really stick with you are those little narrative bits, those unique details.
Like the many wives and children for Issachar's numbers.
Zelophehad's daughters and the whole inheritance backstory.
The tragedy in Ephraim naming Beriah because of misfortune.
Shira building towns.
And Asher being described as choice men and outstanding leaders.
Yeah, those moments really punch through the data. They give you these glimpses of individual lives, specific events, and show that tribal value wasn't just about headcount.
Exactly. It shows that even inside what looks like, a dry database, there's this human richness, this historical texture, just waiting.
They remind us these aren't just abstract ancestry charts. They're documents reflecting the real priorities, the values, even the specific memories and pains of these ancient communities.
This chapter, 1 Chronicles 7, it's just a powerful example of how seemingly boring data numbers can carry so much weight. History, identity, land claims, even really vivid human stories.
It challenges you to look closer, doesn't it? To ask why certain things are included and others aren't.
It really does. And, it makes you think about the records we keep today.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, what do our lists emphasize? Our databases, our census data, even our social media profiles. What picture do they paint? What details do we choose to highlight about families or communities or individuals?
Are we just counting things, or are we capturing the why, the stories behind the numbers?
Exactly. What might someone, say, 1,000 years from now, conclude about us, about
Okay.
our priorities, our values, what we thought was important, based on the kinds of records we're creating right now?
Do our records capture the full picture, the good, the bad, the achievements, the losses, the quiet contributions? Or are we just focused on a few metrics?
It's definitely a perspective shift. Taking something like this chapter, this list, and seeing it as a mirror.
Yeah.
What matters most?
Yeah. Something to definitely ponder next time you encounter what looks like just, well, a dry list of data. There might be a whole world hidden inside it.